How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the UKnowAdamTsang podcast, where you get to know a little bit more about people, passions, and all things business. Today, I'm hanging out with Clint Nessmith,
Nessmith.
who is the CEO of the Resource Development Group. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So tell me what it is that your organization does.
Sure, we're a very niched organization. We only work with chambers of commerce and economic development organizations around the country to help them with their economic development fundraising. And what that funds for them it's usually something along the lines of job creation, business retention and expansion, business attraction, marketing, DE&I, talent development, talent attraction, anything that has to do with advancing the economy or working on community advancement work, we typically get involved in.
That's awesome. So, one of the things that kind of like stood out to me about what it is that you've done is, you're able to go into communities and really start this grassroots type movement, which helps improve the communities overall. And I think that there's a ton of like communities out there that need that specific function. So, one of the things that I have a question about is, how did you end up in this specific space, right? Like what kind of like compelled you? What is kind of like the backstory?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of a fun backstory. So back whenever I was in high school and I went to Statesboro High,
Okay.
I thought I was going to be an architect.
Okay.
And then ultimately, though, decided that wasn't my path, but I was going to be a building construction major at Georgia Southern, and
Understood.
started going down that path, and even declared going into Southern as a freshman. Figured out, as many of us do, once we're in college, that route probably wasn't my future.
Gotcha.
And ultimately decided to become a political science major
Okay.
after taking an amazing class from Deborah Sabia.
Okay.
And that ultimately led me to, okay, I want to be a political science major, but what can I do with that? Political fundraising is sort of where I was.
Ended up.
Yeah, that's where I thought I was going to end up.
Okay, got you.
Ultimately, where that led up after graduation was trying to find a fundraising job. And the job I got hired for was at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, working with the two consultants that founded this company as their campaign coordinator, essentially. And they hired me on the team after that project was done.
Got you. How long was that project?
It was only a year.
It was only a year?
It was only a year.
And so, like, this is stuff that I have no clue about. So, like, how does one get into that position of, like, fundraising, political fundraising?
Right.
Like, what kind of, like, churned that?
Yeah, well, whenever I was when I was in college, I started volunteering for every political campaign I could possibly volunteer for in the region.
Okay.
And that led me to organizing a fundraising campaign for one of the candidates I had worked with.
Okay.
Rosemary Kazans, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
To be very specific. And I thought, oh, wait, if I'm raising money for a candidate, there's money coming in the door. That means they'll have money to pay me. So rather than be like a political consultant, I'm going to go and be a political fundraiser. And then I also ended up being a student worker at the Georgia Southern University Foundation, which was a lot of grunt work, but it was very valuable. And so I knew I was definitely going in the fundraising realm. And then I worked with a headhunter in Atlanta. And they were tied into the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and that's when they connected me to this Forward Atlanta fundraising campaign job opening, and the rest was history.
Awesome. So you got connected with them. You started kind of like working with them, and then how did you fall into kind of like this? They had already started this group.
They had, RDG was founded in 1995, so they and I graduated from Southern in '99. So just to kind of give you a sense of that timing. So the Metro Atlanta Chamber's Forward Atlanta campaign is the longest running economic development campaign in the country. It actually has its roots back in the 1920s.
Okay.
And it hasn't gone on consistently throughout that entire time, but it is definitely the oldest. And our firm, even before I was with it, had long worked for the Metro Atlanta Chamber on their Forward Atlanta Special Fund, Economic Development Fund. And so I was essentially the secretary of Rob Radcliffe and Mike Trubiano, who owned the company. And literally about halfway through that campaign, they pulled me into a conference room in the chamber and said, "Hey, what do you want to do after this?" And I said, "I want to do what you guys do." And they said, "Great, you're hired."
Just like that.
Just like that.
Did you have any like I guess there was a moment in your mind that wasn't what you were going to do.
No, it seemed pretty fun and sexy, quite honestly. I
Yeah.
mean, from a job from a career standpoint, and it's probably one of the most interesting jobs I could have ever possibly landed in.
So let's dive into that.
Yes.
What makes it so interesting?
Well, everybody looks or hopes at least for in their career that they're going to be doing something where they can truly see value beyond a paycheck, right? And I too look for that. And this job, while I can't measure it, I know that because of what I'm raising money for, that I'm impacting literally potentially millions of people across the country in the different communities that we work in, because we do tend to work in the major metros with the regional entities. And when you're raising money for job creation, and you're raising money for talent development and community improvement type things, I mean, that's really rewarding to me. And then you combine that with the sorts of people that I get to interact with and the folks I've met just over my 20-year history of doing this. You just can't beat it. I mean, I would say pre-COVID, whenever all the travel sort of stopped for a little while, all my friends lived elsewhere.
Sure.
And it wasn't until I got to spend a fair amount of time here over the last 2.5 years that I really kind of developed a more
central,
robust friend group locally. But just some of the best CEOs in the country, I get to work really, really closely with, and you just can't beat that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So let's talk about like a few specifics, right? Like we've kind of like have this top down view of kind of like things that you do, why you do it, right? So what's been kind of like one of the most rewarding experiences for you, like during this career that you've had, working with kind of like economies.
Sure.
Essentially, right?
Sure, right. So I would have to go. That's a really interesting question. I could go a number of different directions with it, but I think I would have to start with Jacksonville.
Wow.
So obviously a major metro, very close to Statesboro.
Haven't heard the best things about Jacksonville. I don't know if it's still the same case, but there's sometimes it doesn't have the best reputation. So
I got to tell you, that's changing.
Yeah. Okay.
And has changed a lot. So I have worked with the Jax USA Partnership, which is their 7-region economic development organization.
Okay.
So it's actually headquartered within or under the Chamber, Jacksonville Chamber umbrella, but they're the economic development arm of the Chamber. And I've worked with them now for 5 different engagements, starting back when I was like 26 years old.
A lot of history there.
And I'm 44 now. You got to think. I mean, Jacksonville has really evolved over the course of that 20-year period, from a port that was really suffering to trying to get out of more of a basic manufacturing sort of economy to where they are today. And where they are today, as I've been able to witness it and watch our client be on the front lines of it, is they are the emerging financial services sector market on the East Coast.
Okay.
Matter of fact, there's even a trading floor in Jacksonville. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, I was not. Is that how recent was that got put in?
That has come in within probably the last 5 years.
It's crazy.
They're also the headquarters really for fintech. And obviously, as an entrepreneur, a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to you will be very familiar with fintech funding. Yep. That is the fintech headquarters of the world right now with FIS investments. I mean, it's really amazing what the financial services sector has done there. And that didn't really exist when I first started working with them. You also look at their healthcare sector.
Sure.
And you've got Mayo down there. And as over time, you've seen these hospitals begin to work together on different things. And what you're about to see is I think, if I'm reading the tea leaves right, a almost Houston-like healthcare model.
That's crazy.
As they really finally begin to not just convene to talk about how things are going, but really convene to talk about research and partnering and trying to do some really amazing things down there.
So, the question that begs to be asked is like, how did it get to that point? Because, back in the day, when you think about Jacksonville, it was not a center of anything, actually.
Right.
It was more of like, this maybe potentially impoverished area that had a lot of difficulty kind of like, maintaining like its true identity.
Mhm.
So, you're telling me that you are the organization that kind of like helped guide maybe some of those things to happen. So the question that I would have is how?
Yeah, so our work now, and to be clear, our organization helped fund the work that made that helped to implement the strategies
Okay.
completely.
Okay.
So basically, our clients usually go through, particularly our major metro clients, tend to go through a strategic planning process every 3 to 5 years.
Got you.
And that is always very forward thinking. And then we come in and we will raise the money from the private sector and the public sector to fund that work.
Mm-hmm.
But those strategies evolve over time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's what is it's just like if you did one on Statesboro, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses,
Sure.
how do we take advantage of our strengths, and how do we address our weaknesses?
Sure.
Same thing with every market that we work in, and just we've helped to work with the private sector and our client to drive that work ahead, even though our role is more niche from a fundraising standpoint. So I'll give you another one. That it's actually a market we don't work in because Nashville actually raises their own money. But I think this is also important to think about, and that would be obviously talent is on the minds of everybody right now. Nobody has enough of it.
Sure.
And Nashville 15 years ago had a crisis. The state was about to take over the Nashville County high schools, all of them, because their graduation rate was absolutely abysmal. I think it was like 52%.
Sure.
And kind of in a Hail Mary, last second Hail Mary, you had the chamber, the K through 12 education system, you had higher ed, you had certainly the private sector as part of the chamber, and the Ford Foundation come together to create a career academy model, which is basically not forced, but it's designed to make every high school kid going into any Nashville high school go into a career academy pillar.
Okay.
And all of their classes are taught to the kids from whatever that career academy focus is. So if you're in a construction career academy, then like if you're in geometry class, they're going to talk to you about geometry from a standpoint of construction.
Understood.
But now they've been doing it long enough where there's a reason why Nashville is one of the strongest economies in the country, and that is because they probably have the strongest pipeline of workers coming out of their
so they're
K through
fixing
12
the
systems.
education system
You
to
got it.
create these like valuable and potentially employees or whatever it is.
You got it. You've got these kids that are coming out of high school now, many with certifications, already connected to companies that are probably started their post-secondary education, whatever that might be, and they're getting snatched right up.
Yeah.
And so in a market,
it helps the economy just continue to move.
Well, and what that does, that helps to raise up folks that are they didn't grow up in a family that had any sort of college or post-secondary education, and suddenly they probably are.
Yeah.
And that changes generations.
Mm.
That changes the economy. I mean, it is, it doesn't happen overnight, but 15 years also can go by in a hurry.
That's right.
And that's truly what they've accomplished.
So
there.
education is one of those pieces that I think
Mhm.
is critical in trying to help a community grow.
Right.
One of the questions I would have in here is you mentioned this Hail Mary.
Mm-hmm.
How are these, various different organizations? Because you threw out, I think you said Ford. Was that kind of like
The
part
Ford
of that?
Foundation, yes.
Yeah. So like, it seems like there's all these different like organizations like coming together
Mhm.
to try to fix that problem.
You
right?
got it.
So like how was that like
Yeah.
were they just like, oh my God, we need to fix this?
Mhm.
Or how does that start?
Well, so never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
Okay.
But they had a crisis.
Yes.
And frequently our clients do go through
Crisis
crises.
stage.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
isn't that funny? They don't actually do anything until the crisis is actually when everything's broken, then they come and ask for help. Right?
Exactly.
Just kidding.
Exactly. But whether there's a crisis or not,
Okay.
the central overarching sort of theme that cuts through everything
Mhm.
is the private sector coming together saying we're going to make something happen because we've got issues and we need to address those.
Mhm.
And we're going to work with whoever we think is the most relevant organization for helping us address our problems, which tends to be a chamber of commerce or an economic development organization, to begin to drive this from almost a grassroots holistic standpoint.
Understood.
And Nashville, Nashville would have never become the model, the number one model, in my opinion, for tackling workforce development if it had been a top-down. It had to be a bottom-up.
Yeah.
And and I can point to in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
You just think about what they have done to improve their port, or what they've done to really push on this financial services sector or the healthcare sector. That was not a top-down thing. That is a bottom-up thing.
Sure.
We've realized what our strengths are. We know what our challenges are. We know what we need to do. So we're going to work together to make it happen. And whenever you can have a group of leaders come together and sort of collectively put their shoulder into something, that's when big things can happen.
Understood.
And I don't care how big of a community you are or how small of a community you are, that can be the case in every single community.
So the advice that I hear is how you make things happen, how you start this grassroots thing, is by identifying, is by doing, is by, start just going out and just starting. Right. Because I think there's a lot of communities out there that struggle with certain aspects of their community. I think that's just, overall.
Yeah,
we all have our problems. Right. We all have our issues. But, how you change that from a perspective of an individual within an organization or within a community is the question at hand, right?
Right.
So, do you ever, regardless of influence, how does one put themselves in a position to become a leader and start that grassroots type of movement? What have you seen? Is it the business owners?
Yeah, it usually is the business owners. It usually is.
Me.
So you and me now.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
But it really is. It's all about talking to your executive peer set, talking to public sector officials too that are more inclined to do new things.
Yeah.
And find existing organizations that are willing to sort of push the needle on things. So here we've got a dynamic new leader at the Statesboro Bullock Chamber of Commerce, right? And I know she's got a lot of great ideas. And so our chamber right now I think is a really ideal association here in our community to begin to try to push some things forward. And I think that our challenge has always been in Statesboro that we're still a small town, right?
Sure.
We've got a 22,000 student research university,
Sure.
right in the middle of us. We tend to think about we need to keep doing things the way we've always done them. But I think what we're finding is that if we are willing to take a little bit of risk and do some things, that some pretty exciting developments can happen.
Breaking the mold.
You got it. And it's the old adage: if you're not growing, you're dying, right?
Yeah.
Nobody holds steady.
Yeah.
And you've got to be willing to keep pushing. Again, figuring out what your strengths are, your best opportunities are, working on those, but at the same time looking at your challenges and trying to come up with solutions to that. And if you can pull a group of people together to really focus on that, that's when you can make a real big difference.
Start making some magic happen.
Exactly.
Let's go through a little bit of your journey through all of this, and going back to that. So at some point you were working for this organization and you made the decision that, hey, was it just saying oh, you're the person, or how did that come about? How did you become CEO of that?
Sure.
Right? That's the question at hand.
Right. So you almost have to go back for 5 years.
Okay.
Or maybe even longer than that, quite honestly, because I've actually been a co-owner, a minority owner for about a decade.
Sure.
Within the company. And we're a small firm.
Yeah.
Right now there's, including the guys that I just bought out, there's 6 of us.
Okay.
And there's a reason why we're small.
Nimble.
Which is that's a whole other podcast.
Okay. We'll get there next time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I about 10 years ago, I said, hey, I want to buy in. And I don't know why I want to buy in other than we had just come out of the Great Recession, which of course was the scariest time of my entire career.
Super intense, huh?
Super intense. business basically went away for about 8 months because nobody really knew what to do, right?
Yeah.
And but I said, listen, I want even more stability. I want to be an owner, and became a minority owner. But then about 5 years ago, that's when myself and our two majority owners really started saying, okay, what do we want this to do to be? Because Rob and Mike are about 17 to 20 years older than me. And, we all had to get into a kind of a shared headspace. What did a buyout look like for them?
Yeah.
How did that match up in my mind to what I envisioned the buyout being? I also had to figure out, okay, do I want to buy an existing company that's got an amazing reputation in the industry? Or do I not want to have that outlay of cash and just try to start up my own firm?
Yeah.
And so I had to weigh the pluses and minuses of that. And then ultimately, we had, Rob and Mike did a great job of beginning to position me as really the face of the organization at industry conferences. I was a part of just about every major pitch that our company made to try to pick up business. So being exposed very intentionally to different aspects of the company that historically,
they
Rob
were grooming you.
You got it. You got it. But then ultimately, we had to make the decision, and this actually came quicker than we thought. This is something COVID sped up this decision.
Really?
They were ready to, once they stopped traveling, they were ready to be done traveling for a lot, for forever, basically. And so that's when we had to figure out, okay, how do we fund it? And as you know, there's a variety of different ways you buy a business.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they decided that they wanted to have all of their money up front.
Yeah.
And the best way for me to do that, as I don't have a large sum of money just sitting there waiting to be spent on our company, was to go through the SBA.
Okay.
And so we spent 3 months looking at potential bankers that could help us with the SBA process. And then ultimately landed on Ready Capital, which is actually based out of New Jersey, not local. I never would have thought I would have not worked with a local company. It's certainly where we started on that front. But Ready Capital was very used to working with firms like ours that don't have a lot of assets. Like we don't have a building, that we can put up as collateral.
So what is the assets of the company?
The assets are the people.
Yeah.
and I mean that's basically it. The assets are the people in our P&L sheet.
Yeah. I bet they had a field day with that one.
Well,
right? You give them the information. They're like, "What's going on?"
Well,
here?
That's why we ended up there. And actually, we were recommended to work with them after about the third banker we had interacted with, because they said, "Look, these guys are used to working with firms like yours."
Gotcha.
And so once we had that, had them identified, then we spent the next 3.5 months working through giving the SBA everything that they possibly could want. Which I'm telling you right now, if you've never done it, it's the most frustrating experience of your life.
What makes it so hard?
They want everything, and they want to be as protected as they can possibly be. So you have to, not only are you producing all these documents that show the history of finances, but you're having to get life insurance, and you're having to get them set up so that they can take a second out on your mortgage, and so on and so forth. And it's just incessant. You'll be in the middle of working on, your day job. And then all of a sudden you get an email that says, hey, we need this, this, and this. And it's like, crap. I got to stop and do that. But it just goes on. And just when you think you're done, you're not done. And again, for us, it probably took us about 3.5 months. That's probably about as fast as it could possibly go. But, I'm glad it was there. Because for a lot of folks, that's the only vehicle to fund a business buyout. 2 would be, I'm glad I did it just so that I can know what it's like. I mean, I talk about entrepreneurship all the time whenever we are working with our clients. And actually having that personal experience of trying to get funding for a company is harder than it should be. that became very apparent,
Uh-huh.
and it also became very apparent that to buy a company, you have to have money, and not everybody can have money.
Yep.
And you have to have some level of buy-in, right? Because
Sure.
they require you to put in an injection of capital, but based off of the purchase
Finances.
price.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you got it. And not everybody can do that.
Yeah.
And so I have a new appreciation for that. I get the jacket, the club jacket.
Uh-huh.
I went to the SBA and I walked away with a company. But boy, I never want to do it again.
Yeah. Never again.
Never again.
One time is
One
enough.
time is enough.
So, in that, what you were talking about, you mentioned something about entrepreneurship. And I think that, as what your organization does, it works with a lot of entrepreneurs. But I wanted to ask, what does entrepreneurship mean to like a community? What does that do for a community?
Yeah, it's always been important, certainly, and you look at the data coming out of out of these COVID years, where you've got the Great Resignation, and what does the Great Resignation really mean? Well, it means a number of different things, but one of them is there are more startups now than there have ever been. And when you think about the entrepreneurial spirit that we tend to have here in the U.S., and you think about the impact that innovation and sustainability are going to be having on our economies moving forward, and it's almost going to be almost impossible to separate innovation and sustainability. I mean, think about a Tesla.
Sure.
I mean, that is innovation, and that is sustainability
tied in together,
and everything, and the ecosystem that it requires to make all that happen.
Sure.
Is massive.
Yeah.
And or you think about healthcare.
Yeah.
And how many little companies make up a healthcare ecosystem that ultimately lead to really big things. Like we're working in Philadelphia right now with the Philadelphia Chamber. You want to know where the COVID vaccines got their start? In Philadelphia.
Wow.
You want to see the ecosystem that they have built out? It's primarily little companies. And they've got a great idea.
Come together.
That come together. You got it to really feed into this and to make it all happen. And so as we continue to see our economy evolve here in the U.S., as important as entrepreneurship has always been, it's going to become even more important because it's going to be the innovation economies that are going to be the most productive economies.
For small communities, I think oftentimes they're, and just a general statement, but there's oftentimes, because they're smaller, because access to capital is easier, right? Like in these larger areas, because access to capital is more difficult,
right?
They are forced to work together,
right?
But in smaller communities, you can kind of maneuver a little bit easier in order to achieve those things, and everybody is kind of like on their own path, if you will, because they're building their own tribe. How do you create a system that allows everybody to then come back together to achieve a specific challenge in your hand? Because that is really what will be powerful, right? If everybody's working towards the same goal, then that goal doesn't seem as daunting anymore.
Right. You got it. So I'm going to point you back to the same place I pointed you before.
Yeah.
A chamber of commerce or an economic development organization is a great place to sort of pull that together. Our clients are repeatedly asked to basically map out the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And, where are the funds? Where are the angel investors? Where are the people that are willing to provide cheap or free coaching services, for an entrepreneur? And that's just kind of a baseline. Then you move into more along the lines of what, say, the Charleston Regional Development Alliance is doing, where they are actively recruiting companies that invest capital into the Charleston market. And they started that about 5 years ago and have managed to attract in a number of firms from other parts of the country that either have set up their headquarters in Charleston or they are they've got satellite offices, where you are, where you basically have the funders in the back in the backyard, right? Or and this isn't a small community at all, but you think about Atlanta. I mean, as big as Atlanta is, they did not have a lot of capital for entrepreneurs available, and ultimately, I think it was Jeff Sprecher about 10 years ago.
Who's that?
He's the CEO of Intercontinental Exchange,
Okay,
and basically said, you know what, if we can't attract investment firms into the market, we're going to make our own fund.
Mm-hmm.
And they did.
Mm. They just did it themselves.
And they just did it themselves. And, so we talk about coming together and doing things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of stuff.
Yeah. Just making that move.
You just have to do it. You have to have a champion or two.
Yeah.
That can kind of pull everybody together and to make it happen.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for everything that you do, for the work that you kind of like put into like all these communities that you are a part of. How big is your region? How widespread? I heard Philadelphia out there.
Yeah.
Are you just across the nation?
Yeah, we work across the country. Though most of our clients, or you can almost draw a line in Texas North. And then we primarily work from Texas East.
Gotcha.
Only because most of us live on this side of all of us live on this side of the country.
Understood.
And that's not to say we don't go out west. We've done some really cool projects in Vegas and San Francisco and Seattle and just places you just got to go because it's cool. But essentially the country, the entire country is our oyster.
Yep.
And I'd say the entire world is our oyster, except we are the only ones. We're the only country that funds economic development the way that we do.
That's great. That's great. So. My audience is mainly like business people. Mm-hmm. If there's kind of one word of advice that you would have for them,
I would say this. It's really all about your team. Mm. And the more you can make them feel appreciated, the more that you can make them feel included in what's in what's going on in the company. I think the stronger team you're going to have, the more likely they are to stay with you, and I'm hoping that is what I can accomplish as I take on this mantle with RDG as CEO.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's the show.
I enjoyed it.
Awesome.